Welcome to English Easy Hub. Join us as we ignite the flames of your English learning journey together.
Please subscribe to watch and embark on your English learning journey. Don't miss out on the exciting content. In this conversation, Simon seeks advice from his professor about whether reading English aloud can improve his speaking skills. His curiosity stems from hearing about the technique, but not fully understanding its impact on fluency, pronunciation, and overall communication ability. Throughout the dialogue, Simon asks thoughtful questions about how reading aloud influences various aspects of language learning, from pronunciation and fluency to intonation and pacing. The professor provides in-depth explanations, emphasizing how this practice goes beyond basic word repetition and engages multiple parts of the brain and speech mechanics, making it a valuable tool for language learners.
Does reading English aloud really help improve speaking skills? I've heard it mentioned, but I don't fully understand how it works.
Yes, Simon, reading aloud is an excellent technique to improve speaking skills. It's not just about repeating words, but more about training your brain, ears, and mouth to work together. When you read silently, you're focusing on comprehension, but when you read aloud, you're engaging your vocal muscles and ear in a way that mimics real conversation.
I see. So when I read aloud, I'm training my mouth to form the right sounds more naturally?
Exactly. Reading aloud forces you to practice the physical act of speaking. You're creating muscle memory for the sounds of English. Over time, your pronunciation improves, and your brain becomes more familiar with the rhythms and patterns of the language. It's like practicing a musical instrument. You're training your speech muscles.
But when I'm reading aloud, am I improving fluency as well, or is it more focused on pronunciation?
It's both. Fluency comes with repetition and familiarity, and reading aloud exposes you to a wide range of sentence structures and vocabulary. By consistently practicing, you'll find that the phrases and sentence patterns start to feel more natural. You'll not only pronounce the words better, but also begin to speak more smoothly and with less hesitation. You're building confidence in your speaking abilities.
What if I'm reading something too difficult for me? Sometimes I get stuck on words and my flow gets interrupted. Is that still helpful, or does it hold me back?
Great question. If the text is too advanced, it might frustrate you and disrupt the flow. However, a little bit of challenge is good. If you get stuck, try to pause and focus on breaking down the word into smaller parts. This practice sharpens your pronunciation. Ideally, you want to read something that is just slightly above your current level, enough to push you without overwhelming you. You can always go back and reread those challenging sections to improve fluency once you become familiar with the tricky parts.
So, reading something like children's books, where the language is simpler, might be a good way to start?
Absolutely. Starting with simpler texts builds confidence and allows you to focus on fluency without getting bogged down by difficult vocabulary. As you progress, you can gradually move to more complex materials like short stories, articles, or novels. The key is consistency. Reading aloud every day, even for just 10 to 15 minutes, will help solidify your progress.
That makes sense. But how does reading aloud translate to speaking in real conversations? When I'm reading, I'm just following the text, but in conversations, I have to think on my feet.
That's true. Conversations are more dynamic, but reading aloud prepares you for that spontaneity. By reading, you're familiarizing yourself with natural language patterns. These patterns become stored in your memory, so when you're in a real conversation, your brain can retrieve them faster. It's similar to how athletes train with repetitive drills. During a game, they don't think about the drill, but the movements are second nature. Reading aloud is your language drill.
I never thought of it that way. So, it's like I'm conditioning myself to think and speak more fluidly.
Exactly. Plus, Reading aloud exposes you to different registers of English. For example, if you're reading dialogues, you can practice conversational tone, and if you're reading an article, you're practicing formal language. Both are valuable when it comes to improving your overall speaking ability.
What about intonation? I've heard that reading aloud helps with improving how natural you sound, like the rise and fall of your voice. Is that true?
Yes, intonation is crucial for sounding natural, and reading aloud helps with that too. English has a specific melody. Certain words are stressed while others are less emphasized. By reading aloud, you practice those natural rises and falls in tone. You'll notice that native speakers don't speak in a flat, monotonous way, but instead use intonation to convey meaning, emotion, or even sarcasm. Reading dialogues is particularly good for this because it gives you the opportunity to imitate conversational speech.
That's something I struggle with. I think I sound too robotic when I speak.
Don't worry, that's a common problem for language learners. Reading aloud is a great way to break that robotic speech pattern. Start by focusing on the punctuation. Use pauses at commas. Raise your tone at the end of questions, and emphasize key words in a sentence. Over time, this will become more natural, and you'll start to develop a more fluid and expressive speaking style.
Should I try to imitate native speakers while I read aloud, or is it better to focus on my own voice?
Imitating native speakers can be helpful, especially if you're trying to grasp the rhythm and pronunciation. But it's also important to develop your own natural speaking voice. Don't feel pressured to sound exactly like a native speaker. It's more important to focus on being clear and confident in your speech. Listening to recordings of native speakers can guide you, but your own voice should feel comfortable.
How about recording myself while I read? Would that help?
Recording yourself is one of the most effective ways to improve. When you listen back, you'll notice things you might not pick up on while speaking. You might hear mispronunciations, areas where you could improve intonation, or places where your rhythm feels off. It gives you a chance to self-correct. Over time, you'll also hear your own progress, which is motivating.
I've always hated listening to my own voice, but I can see how it would help me spot those mistakes.
That's a common feeling. Most people don't like hearing themselves at first, but once you get used to it, you'll find it's an incredibly useful tool. It's like watching game footage in sports. You learn a lot by reviewing your performance.
What about pacing? Sometimes I feel like I read too fast or too slow. Should I be aiming for a certain speed?
Focus on accuracy and clarity first. Speed will come naturally as you become more comfortable. Reading too fast often leads to mispronunciations and missed intonations. Start slow, ensuring that you're pronouncing each word clearly and using the correct intonation. As your confidence builds, your speed will naturally increase. The goal is to strike a balance, speaking clearly without rushing, but not so slowly that it sounds unnatural.
This is all really helpful. Should I also practice speaking without reading aloud, like just talking to myself?
Yes, speaking freely without a script is important too. You can use what you've practiced in reading aloud as a foundation, then challenge yourself by describing things around you, narrating your day, or discussing topics of interest. This will help you build the ability to form sentences on the spot. It's good to have a mix of both reading aloud and free speaking practice.
That's great advice. I guess the key is consistency. Reading aloud, recording myself, and practicing daily should help me build my skills gradually.
Exactly. Language learning is all about consistent effort over time. Keep experimenting with different texts, listen to yourself, and enjoy the process. You'll be surprised by how much progress you can make.
By the end of the conversation, Simon gains a clear understanding of how reading aloud enhances not just his pronunciation, but also his fluency, intonation, and overall comfort with speaking English. The professor highlights key strategies such as focusing on accuracy before speed, using dialogues and stories for practice, recording oneself to self-correct, and blending reading aloud with free speaking practice. The discussion reinforces the idea that reading aloud builds muscle memory for speech, prepares the learner for spontaneous conversation, and helps develop a more natural and expressive tone. Ultimately, the conversation underscores the importance of consistent, focused practice and enjoying the process as a means to significant improvement in speaking skills.
Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe, like, comment, and share to keep the English learning journey alive.